I need you to understand one thing before this story begins. The moment I opened my front door last night, I already knew someone had been inside. Not because anything was broken, not because anything was stolen, but because the house was breathing. A slow, heavy exhale, coming from somewhere deep in the dark. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. Maybe it was the cold wind outside, maybe the stress from my night shift, maybe just exhaustion. But then it happened again, this low dragging sound, thick and wet, like lungs filled with something that shouldn't be there. I froze right there in the doorway, my keys still dangling from the lock. And in that 1 second, every instinct in my body told me to run. You ever feel that sudden pressure in your chest, like something ancient and hungry has just noticed you? That's what it felt like. And the worst part? The sound stopped the moment I stepped inside. Like the house was holding its breath, waiting. I kept telling myself it had to be the old pipes or the air vents or maybe even an animal trapped somewhere. Anything normal. Anything human. But the air felt wrong, thicker than it should have been. Heavy in a way that pressed against my skin. As if I wasn't alone anymore. I didn't even take off my shoes. I just stood in the entryway listening. And for a moment it was dead silent. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My living room couch, the one I always leave pushed tightly against the wall, was slightly angled. Not by much. Maybe 2 inches. Maybe 3. But it wasn't where I left it. I never moved that couch. And that's when the questions started racing through my head. Did someone break in? Are they still here? Have they been waiting? Or worse, watching? I should have left. Anyone with common sense would have left. But something pulled me deeper inside. Like the house wanted me to see what had changed, what had been touched. My fingers trembled as I reached for the light switch. But before I could flip it, before I could even breathe, the sound came again. Not from upstairs. Not from the basement. Not from any room a person could hide in. It came from directly behind the couch. A slow scrape like skin dragging across fabric. My eyes locked onto that small gap behind the couch. That darkness so thick it looked like it had depth, like it went somewhere further than it should. I whispered, "Hello?" Not because I was brave, but because I needed to hear something human answer back. Nothing did. Instead, the breathing returned. Louder. Closer. I took 1 step forward, and the floorboards groaned beneath me. Something shifted behind the couch in response. Just a tiny movement, but enough to tell me it wasn't the house. It wasn't the pipes. It wasn't my imagination. Something was back there. Something aware of me. My heart slammed against my ribs. My mouth went dry. I felt a cold tremor run up my spine, like invisible fingers brushing my skin. And then in the silence, a whisper so faint I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. "You came back early?" I didn't recognize the voice. I didn't recognize the tone. But I recognized the intention. Whoever, or whatever, was behind that couch, had been inside long enough to learn my schedule. And I realized with a sinking horror, that the sound I'd heard when I came through the door wasn't breathing. It was excitement. My name is Daniel Harper, and nothing about my life is supposed to be exciting. I'm not an adventurer, not a thrill seeker, not even the type of person who goes out past 9 unless I have to. I work a quiet job, keep to myself, and live in a modest 2-bedroom home on the edge of a small town in northern Pennsylvania. The kind of place where you know every neighbor's dog by name but barely remember the owners. Most nights look exactly the same for me. It was a Thursday evening around 10:13 p.m., and the world outside was calm in that comforting small-town way. Streetlights humming. A soft breeze brushing through the maple trees. Distant cars rolling down the highway like slow, steady waves. Nothing strange. Nothing off. Just another uneventful night after a long shift stocking shelves at the grocery store. I remember feeling unusually relaxed as I drove home. Work had been normal. Slow. Predictable. And I like predictable. I like coming home, making a late dinner, and unwinding in front of the TV with the same shows I've seen 100 times. Routine is safe. Routine is comfort. And that night, comfort was exactly what I expected. I pulled into my driveway, the familiar crunch of gravel under my tires grounding me in the ordinary. My porch light glowed a soft yellow, the kind of warm light that makes a house feel lived-in friendly. My home has always been my sanctuary, a place where the world can't bother me, where I can breathe, where everything stays exactly where I left it. Inside, I imagined the soft hum of my refrigerator, the faint scent of pine from the candle I forgot to blow out that morning, and the cozy clutter of my small living room. Books on the coffee table, blanket draped over the armchair, remote exactly where I left it. I wasn't thinking about anything heavy, just dinner. Should I heat leftover pasta? Or maybe just microwave something quick? Did I have enough milk for tomorrow? My mind drifted lazily between small, harmless thoughts. My shoulders loosened. My heartbeat steady. No sense of fear. No hint of dread. Just the kind of peaceful solitude you don't appreciate until it's gone. When I stepped out of my car, the air felt cool and crisp. I took a moment to look around the quiet neighborhood. Porch lights glowing, curtains drawn, the distant bark of someone's dog echoing faintly down the block. Everything felt normal. Completely normal. I remember thinking how grateful I was for nights like these. How simple life felt. How safe. My house sat still and silent, exactly as it should. The windows were dark except for the faint glow spilling from the hallway light I always leave on for myself. A habit I picked up years ago. Not because I'm scared of the dark, but because a little light makes an empty house feel less empty. As I walked toward the front door, keys in hand, my thoughts were soft and steady. I was thinking about the weekend, about maybe taking a drive into town, maybe cleaning out the spare room I kept saying I'd get to, one of these days. My mind wasn't anywhere near danger. It was on simple, everyday things, exactly the way a peaceful life should be. At that moment, the world felt predictable, controlled, and perfectly safe. If someone had stopped me right there, in the warm glow of my porch light, and warned me not to go inside, I would have laughed. Nothing bad ever happens in quiet houses in small towns. At least that's what I believed. Right up until the moment I opened my front door and sensed that something had changed. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. Not danger. Not fear. Just something off. It was small at first, so small I almost ignored it. The air felt slightly cooler than usual, like someone had left a window open. But when I checked, every window was shut and locked just the way I left them. I brushed it off. Old house, old insulation, things happen. At least that's what I told myself. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, the familiar metallic clatter echoing louder than it should have in the quiet house. The sound seemed to bounce around the walls longer than normal, stretching into the silence like the house wasn't absorbing noise the way it usually did. My living room was dim, lit only by the soft glow from the hallway light. Everything looked the same at first glance: couch, coffee table, TV, bookshelf. Nothing obviously disturbed. Nothing broken. But there was a heaviness in the room that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to ignore it. Long day. Tired brain. Nothing to worry about. I headed toward the kitchen, thinking about food again, when I heard the first sound. A faint click. Like a door latch gently shifting. I froze mid-step. It wasn't loud, barely even noticeable. But in a silent house, small sounds become sharp. Clear. Unavoidable. I waited, listening. Nothing. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant creak of the house settling. Normal sounds. Harmless sounds. Still, something in my chest tightened. I walked into the kitchen and flicked on the light. Bright, warm, reassuring. Everything looked untouched. The dish I left in the sink, the cereal box on the counter, the magnets on the fridge holding up old receipts and reminders. But the smell, the usual pine candle scent, had faded, replaced by something faintly metallic. Not strong enough to be alarming, but noticeable. Out of place. I tried to convince myself it was just the cold air mixing with the warm kitchen. Logic helps when your nerves start to fray. I grabbed a glass of water and turned to head back to the living room. That's when I felt it. An unmistakable sensation of being watched. Not from the window. Not from outside. From inside the house. I stopped at the threshold between the kitchen and the hallway, staring into the dim living room. Nothing moved. Nothing shifted. But my chest tightened again, and a faint shiver crawled across my skin. It felt like someone was standing just behind the darkness, waiting for me to step in. Get a grip, I muttered to myself. You're tired, that's all. But my voice didn't echo the way it normally did. The house seemed to swallow the sound. I moved slowly toward the living room anyway, forcing myself to act normal. I turned on the lamp beside the couch, flooding the room with soft yellow light. The light helped a little. But as I looked around, something subtle stood out, barely noticeable yet deeply wrong. A book on the coffee table had shifted. Not by much, just a slight angle change. I hadn't touched that book in days. My stomach twisted. I crouched and reached out to straighten it, trying to calm myself with the simplest explanation. Maybe I bumped the table yesterday. Maybe I left it crooked. Maybe I just forgot. But as my fingers brushed the cover, a soft thump echoed from upstairs. Not loud, not frantic, just a single solid, deliberate sound, as if someone had carefully stepped onto the floor above me. I slowly turned my head toward the staircase. The shadows at the top of the stairs seemed darker than before, thicker somehow, like the hallway light didn't reach as far as it usually did. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. Small things, little changes, barely enough to justify fear. Yet every instinct in my body whispered the same quiet warning. Something was inside the house, and it was waiting for me to notice. I stared up the staircase, waiting, praying for another sound that would explain the first one away. A pipe, the house settling, anything ordinary, anything human. But the silence that followed wasn't normal. It was thick, heavy, like the air itself was bracing for something. I took one slow step toward the stairs, then another. My heartbeat hammered so loudly I could feel it in my neck. The shadows at the top of the stairs didn't move, but somehow they felt aware of me. Halfway up, the atmosphere changed in an instant. The temperature dropped sharply, the same way it does when you open a walk-in freezer. My breath came out in a visible puff. But the heater had been on all day. There was no reason, no explanation for that sudden cold. That's when I heard it. A soft rhythmic sound coming from the hallway above. Not footsteps this time. Not breathing. But something far worse. A slow dragging movement across the floor. Like fingertips trailing along the wooden boards. Then they tapped. Lightly. Deliberately. Tap, tap, tap. My entire body went rigid. Someone was up there. No, something was up there. I forced myself to keep climbing because going back down meant turning my back to whatever was waiting at the top. And every instinct I had screamed that turning my back was a bad idea. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched into darkness. The single dim bulb overhead flickered once, just once, but it was enough to send another jolt through me. "Who's there?" I whispered. This time I didn't expect a response. But I got one. A voice, low and rasping, far too close, answered from the far end of the hall. Daniel, my own name. Spoken by something that shouldn't know it. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my footing. My pulse exploded in my ears. That voice wasn't familiar. It wasn't human. It sounded like vocal cords being dragged through gravel, dry, broken, wrong. I reached for the hallway light switch, flipping it up in a panic. The bulb flashed, buzzed, then went completely dead. Darkness swallowed the hall. I froze, blinded, listening to the ringing silence. My chest rose and fell in sharp, shallow breaths. Then, out of the black, came another sound. A soft shuffling, like someone crawling on hands and knees. The boards creaked under its weight, slow and deliberate, moving closer and closer. I backed toward the staircase, gripping the railing. "Stay back," I blurted out, though I had no idea who or what I was talking to. The crawling stopped. Silence again. Deep. Suffocating. I squinted into the darkness, desperate for movement, shape, anything, and then two faint points of reflected light appeared low to the ground. Eyes, staring directly at me. Not human eyes. They were too wide, too still, too low to the floor to belong to a standing person. My throat tightened as a shape began to emerge around them, slowly silhouetted by the faint glow from the stairwell light behind me. A body, thin to the point of being skeletal, arms bent at unnatural angles, elbows jutting outward like broken branches, and its head tilted sideways, resting against its shoulder, as if the neck had never been meant to hold it upright. The thing whispered again, dragging out my name in a way that made my skin crawl. "Daniel." It began to crawl toward me, fast now, its limbs contorting and scraping the floor with a sound like bone on wood. Panic exploded through me. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't a person. There was something in my house. Something real. And it wanted me. I spun and bolted down the stairs as fast as I could, nearly slipping as I hit the bottom step. Behind me, the creature erupted into a violent, frantic scramble, moving far too quickly, far too erratically for anything living. The threat wasn't subtle anymore. It was coming. I hit the bottom of the stairs so hard my knee almost buckled, but I didn't stop. I sprinted toward the front door, every muscle firing in blind panic. Behind me, the thing hurled itself down the staircase with a violent thundering of limbs, each impact louder and heavier than the last. It wasn't climbing. It was falling, letting gravity carry its twisted body downward in a chaotic, bone-snapping slide. I reached the door and yanked the handle. Locked. My fingers scrambled for the deadbolt. Missed. Slipped. Tried again. Behind me, the creature screeched, an unbearable sound like metal bending in half. It hit the bottom of the stairs and skittered across the floor faster than anything its shape should have allowed. My hand shook violently as I twisted the lock, finally turning it. Just as the creature slammed into the entryway wall inches behind me, the impact shook the whole house. I flung the door open, and a pale clawed hand shot out, grabbing the back of my shirt. It yanked me backward so hard I gasped, my feet lifting off the ground. I was dragged back into the hallway, my fingers barely scraping the wooden floor as I clawed desperately for anything to hold onto. I kicked backward wildly, connecting with something soft and brittle. The creature hissed, sharp and furious, and its grip loosened for a second. Only a second, but it was enough. I twisted free and bolted toward the kitchen, slamming the door behind me and locking it. The thin wood shook violently as the creature hurled itself against the other side, each impact cracking the frame further. Bang, bang, bang. The entire house vibrated. I stumbled across the kitchen, searching desperately for a weapon, anything. Grabbing a long chef's knife from the counter. My breath came in rapid, uneven gasps, the kind that scrape your lungs raw. The banging stopped. Silence. A silence worse than the noise. I stood frozen, knife trembling in my grip, listening to my own heartbeat pounding like a drum. Every instinct screamed, run. Hide. Do something. Then, a soft scratching slid along the bottom of the kitchen door. Slow. Exploratory. Testing. The gap under the door wasn't big enough for anything human to squeeze through. But the sound coming from beneath it wasn't human. A thin gray fingertip pressed into view. Then another. And another. Sliding and probing like it was feeling for a way inside. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a chair. My mind raced. Windows. The back door. Anything. I sprinted toward the back door, unlocked it and shoved it open. But something heavy crashed in the kitchen behind me, skittering across the floor in a horrifying blur. The creature had crawled under the counter or slipped through some space I never noticed. It was impossibly fast, impossibly flexible. It lunged. I barely dodged, slashing wildly with the knife. The blade grazed its shoulder. Instead of blood, a dark, tar-like fluid oozed out, thick and slow. The creature shrieked, a deafening, distorted sound, and recoiled just long enough for me to dive out the back door. I sprinted into the yard barefoot, slipping on cold grass, adrenaline flooding every nerve. Behind me, the creature slammed into the doorway, its silhouette framed in the dim kitchen light. Twisted limbs spread wide, head hanging sideways, eyes reflecting like a predator. I vaulted over the small fence, scraping my leg on a broken board, and hit the ground running. My lungs burned. My vision blurred. Every step felt too slow, too heavy. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran to the neighbor's house, pounding on the door with everything I had left. Help! Open the door. Please. Lights flicked on inside. A shadow approached. The door swung open, revealing Mr. Evans, confused, sleepy, unaware of the horror just feet behind me. I fell inside, collapsing on the floor. Behind me, outside in the darkness, the creature stopped at the edge of the yard. It didn't cross the fence. It just stood there, watching, tilting its broken head slowly, as if disappointed I'd gotten away. For a long time I couldn't speak. Mr. Evans knelt beside me, one hand on my shoulder, asking questions I couldn't process. My thoughts were scattered, torn between shock, terror, and the numb disbelief that I was still alive. All I could manage was a whisper. Something was in my house. First he thought I meant a burglar. He kept asking if I saw a man, if I recognized him, if I was injured. I shook my head over and over, but the words wouldn't come. How do you explain something no one should believe? He finally called the police when he saw the bruise forming around my collar from where the creature had grabbed me. Even then, he looked more confused than afraid. Within 15 minutes, 2 officers arrived, Detective Nolan and Officer Reyes. They talked to me gently, but with that tone people use when they think you're traumatized enough to misremember the details. What exactly did you see? Could it have been an animal? Were you half asleep? Are you sure no one broke in earlier? I kept saying no. 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 It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't anything that should exist. They searched my house while I sat on Evan's couch, a blanket around my shoulders and a glass of water trembling in my hands. My heart hammered each time I heard a floorboard creak in my home next door. The thought of those officers walking through the same hall where that thing had crawled made my stomach twist. After almost an hour, they came back. And their expressions told me everything. They hadn't found anything. No forced entry. No footprints. No signs of damage other than a few dents in the drywall I could have caused myself. The back door was wide open, but that was the only thing out of place, and even that could be blamed on me running out in panic. When I insisted they check the hallway light upstairs, they did. And it turned on without a flicker. When I asked them to look at the floor under the kitchen counter, where I heard it moving, they found nothing but dust and dropped crumbs. When I asked about the black tar-like substance that leaked from its shoulder, they said they didn't see anything like that at all. No stains. No residue. Nothing. It was like the creature had never been there. Detective Nolan eventually pulled me aside and spoke in a calm, almost rehearsed tone. Trauma can distort perception, he said. Sometimes our minds fill in blanks when we're afraid. He didn't say I was lying. He didn't say I was crazy. But the meaning was clear. When they finally left, they told me I'd be fine staying with Mr. Evans for the night. They'd check in tomorrow. They'd keep an eye on the neighborhood. They made it sound like everything was normal, controllable, explainable. But nothing felt explainable. I stayed up the rest of the night on Evan's couch, staring out the window toward my dark house. Every rustle of wind made my chest tighten. Every shadow made me freeze. I didn't sleep. Not even for a second. The next morning, sunlight poured across the yard. The kind of warm, comforting light that should have made everything feel safe again. But it didn't. Because the fence I had vaulted over, the one I scraped my leg on, stood perfectly intact. No broken board. No loose panel. No sign I'd ever touched it. It was like the night had rearranged itself while I wasn't looking. Evans tried to reassure me, but the more I replayed the night, the more one detail clawed at my mind. The creature didn't chase me past the fence. It stopped. Stood still. Watched. Like it wasn't allowed to cross onto someone else's property. Like it knew the rules better than I did. Later that afternoon, when I finally gathered the nerve to walk back home, I noticed something on my front porch. A long, thin scratch mark carved into the doorframe. Fresh. Deep. Deliberate. It hadn't been there when the police searched the house. And right beside it, pressed faintly into the wood, was a bloody fingerprint. Not human-sized. Not human-shaped. Just one long smear. As if something had dragged a single claw down the frame, slowly, patiently, waiting for me to come back. And tonight, as I'm telling this story, trying not to look at the windows, I swear I can hear something out there. Something tapping. Slow. Steady. Waiting. I don't think it left. I think it's still here. And I think it's getting closer.